Every model sat waiting for his approval, but his hand pointed past them to the chubby girl holding a lunchbox. In that silent room, beauty suddenly meant nothing. What did he see in her that everyone else had missed? The room went quiet for the wrong reason. Adrian Cross had not raised his voice. He had not slammed his hand on the glass table or dismissed anyone with the cold little flick of his fingers that people in his company had learned to fear. He only sat back in his chair and looked at the young woman standing at the far end of the penthouse boardroom as if she had just proved something he did not want proved. She was beautiful. They all were. That was the problem. The models and influencers lined along the long conference table had come dressed for a dream they had been promised. A new Manhattan supper club, velvet ropes, camera flashes, old jazz made expensive again. They knew how to lean toward a lens. They knew how to smile without giving anything away. They knew how to make hunger look elegant. But Adrian was looking for something else. Celeste Vane stood near the wall with a tablet tucked against her arm, her smile tight enough to pass for calm. "We still have 6 more candidates waiting," she said. "The campaign tests very well with younger audiences. If we stay on schedule, we can have final selects by tonight." Adrian did not answer right away. Beyond the windows, New York stretched out in a bright, indifferent noon. Inside, Cross and Vale hospitality. Everything had been polished until it lost the touch of human hands. The marble table shone. The black leather chairs were arranged with exact spacing. Even the water glasses looked placed by someone afraid of being wrong. Bertie Lawson stood far from that table, behind a catering counter set up near the side wall, and tried not to be noticed. She had been on her feet since before sunrise. Her black kitchen shirt pulled tight at the shoulders when she reached for the coffee urn, and a dull ache sat low in her back from hauling trays through the service elevator. At 42, Bertie knew better than to envy women half her age under expensive lighting. Envy wasted energy. Energy paid bills. She checked the lid on a tray of pastries, wiped a ring of coffee from the counter, and kept her eyes down. Just finished the job, she told herself. There was tuition to think about. Mara had been trying to pretend community college was enough, but Bertie had seen the brochures hidden under her daughter's bed. There were her mother's appointments, always one more, always at the worst possible time. There was rent, groceries, and the quiet cost of being the person everyone leaned on. So Bertie did what she always did. She made herself useful, invisible if possible. Useful if not. At the table, one of the influencers laughed too loudly at something no one had really said. Celeste glanced at her, then at Adrian, measuring his patience. "Maybe we should bring in music," Celeste said. "Something vintage. It will help them find the mood." "The mood," Adrian repeated. The words came out soft, but they cut through the boardroom. The young women at the table shifted in their chairs. Celeste's smile held. "The supper club needs desire, Adrian. Mystery, a little nostalgia. We're selling an experience." "No," he said. "You're selling a costume." The silence after that was sharper than a shout. Bertie kept her hand on the coffee urn, pretending not to hear. In rooms like this, people like her survived by not reacting. Wealthy people could afford opinions. Working people paid for them. Celeste lowered her tablet. "This is a launch campaign, not a museum dedication." Adrian's jaw tightened. He was dressed in dark, precise clothes, every line of him controlled. But there was a tiredness around his eyes that did not match the room. The place was built to honor music that carried people. When they had nothing else, he said. Not to give rich people a backdrop for photographs. Several of the models looked down at the table. One of them crossed her legs the other way. Another checked her reflection in the dark window and then thought better of it. Bertie felt the air grow colder. She turned slightly away from the room and reached under the counter for her lunch container. She had planned to eat quickly after the casting began, maybe in the service hallway, maybe standing beside the trash bins, if no chair was free. But the schedule had slipped. The models had kept asking for coffee, and her hands had started to shake from not eating. The plastic lid gave a small, stubborn pop. Inside was a simple meal she had packed before dawn. Nothing fancy, nothing plated, just food that could sit in a container, and still taste like somebody had cared enough to make it. The smell rose gently, warm and plain against the coldness of the room. She took the plastic fork from her apron pocket. At the table, Celeste had begun again, her voice polished. We can adjust styling. We can age the palette. Bring in live musicians. Use warmer copy. But the face still needs to be aspirational. Birdie did not mean to make a sound. It slipped out because she was tired. Because hunger made the mind loose. Because some melodies lived in the body long after a person stopped inviting them in. She hummed under her breath, barely louder than the soft scrape of her fork against the container. It was an old line, not a full song. More like a turn in a hallway, a short bridge between one ache and another. Lionel Ward had played it on a worn, upright piano in the common room of the nursing home, where Birdie used to run the kitchen. He would tap the keys with fingers bent from age and tell her not to rush the middle. The middle, he said, was where a song told the truth. Birdie caught herself and stopped. No one at the table should have heard it. But Adrian Cross had. His head turned, not toward her face, not toward her body, toward the sound that had already vanished. Birdie lowered the fork, suddenly aware that the room had changed. The models were no longer posing. Celeste was no longer speaking. The hush had moved from the conference table to the catering counter, and Birdie felt it land on her shoulders like a hand. Adrian stood, Celeste took one step after him. Adrian? He did not look at her. Birdie closed the lid on her food container too quickly, as if the little box had done something wrong. I'm sorry, she said before he reached her. I didn't mean to interrupt. I can step out. Adrian stopped on the other side of the counter. Up close, he seemed less like the owner of a company and more like a man holding himself together by habit. His eyes were fixed and unsettled, the coldness in them cracked by something Birdie did not understand. Behind him, the beautiful young women watched from the table. Celeste's expression sharpened, already calculating the damage of a moment she had not planned. What was that? Adrian asked. Birdie glanced down at the container in her hands. My lunch? No, his voice dropped. The melody, her fingers tightened around the plastic rim. For a second she considered lying, saying she did not know, saying it was nothing. People in rooms like this did not ask working women questions because they wanted the truth. They asked because they wanted control. But Adrian was not looking at her like a man annoyed by a caterer. He looked as if he had heard a voice from a locked room. It's just something I remember, Birdie said carefully. From a long time ago, Adrian did not move. The boardroom behind him had gone completely still. Sing it again, he said. Birdie's throat closed. She looked past him at the row of flawless faces, at Celeste standing with her tablet held tight, at the marble table that cost more than anything in Birdie's apartment. She had spent years teaching herself not to take up space, not with her voice, not with her wafants, not with the dreams she had folded away so Mara could have her own. I don't sing, Birdie said. Adrian's expression changed then. Not softened, not exactly. But something in him faltered, and that was more startling than anger would have been. You just did, he said. The words hung between them. Birdie looked at him, really looked this time, and saw that his impatience was gone. The man who had dismissed beauty like a bad sales pitch was standing before her, as if one broken phrase of music had pulled the floor from under him. She swallowed. From somewhere behind him, one of the influencers whispered, What is happening? Celeste did not answer. Adrian leaned closer, not enough to threaten, but enough that Birdie could no longer pretend this was a mistake that would pass if she stayed quiet. That bridge, he said, each word controlled with effort. Where did you hear it? Birdie felt the old nursing home piano under her memory, the dull keys, Lionel's thin hands, the way he used to pause before the middle as if it hurt him. She opened her mouth, but no answer came. Adrian Cross stared at her as though the fate of his entire supper club had shifted from the polished table behind him to the plastic lunch container in her hands. And Birdie, who had only wanted to finish a catering shift without being seen, understood that the little melody she had carried for years had just made a powerful man afraid. The question stayed in the room after Adrian asked it. Birdie did not answer at once. She kept both hands around her lunch container, as if the thin plastic could give her a place to stand. Behind Adrian, the long boardroom table had gone useless. The beautiful faces, the glossy folders, the careful glasses of water, all of it seemed to belong to another conversation. Celeste was the first to move. "Adrian," she said, calm on the surface, "we have people waiting." He did not turn around. "Let them wait." The words were quiet, but everyone heard the finality in them. Bertie felt heat crawl up her neck. She had spent years learning how to stay out of rooms where powerful people made decisions. Now the most powerful man in the room was looking at her as if she had brought in something dangerous. "I should get back to the service station," she said. "I didn't mean anything by it." "I know you didn't," Adrian said. "That's why I'm asking." That stopped her. He was still controlled, still formal, but his impatience had changed shape. It was no longer aimed at the casting or the campaign. It was aimed at an answer he seemed almost afraid to receive. He led her out of the boardroom and into a private office off the main corridor. The door closed with a soft click, leaving the murmur of the casting behind them. The office was quieter, lined with framed club posters, old black and white photographs, and shelves of boxed records arranged with a precision that felt less like decoration than devotion. Bertie stayed near the door. Adrian noticed. "You're not in trouble." People said that when they had the power to make trouble. Bertie had learned that much. "I'm working," she said. "My company expects me back downstairs when this is over, and I'll make sure they know you were asked to stay." That did not comfort her. It only reminded her how easily he could rearrange a day that she could not afford to lose. Adrian walked to a cabinet near the wall and opened it. Inside were folders, record sleeves, photographs, and sheet music preserved in clear covers. He removed one thin folder and laid it on the desk between them. "Hum the line again," he said. Bertie shook her head. "I told you, I don't sing. I'm not asking you to perform." His voice lowered, and for the first time there was something in it that sounded less like command and more like restraint. "I'm asking where you learned it." Bertie looked at the folder. On the front was the title of a song she recognized, not because she knew music history, but because that melody had floated through diners, hotel bars, and late-night radio for as long as she could remember. The printed notes inside were neat and official. They looked like the kind of truth people believed because it had been typed, stamped, and stored in a clean room. But the middle was wrong. She saw it before she meant to. Her eyes paused where Lionel used to pause. The turn was too smooth on the page, too polished, missing the ache he had insisted belonged there. Bertie's fingers loosened around the container. "There was a man at the home where I used to run the kitchen," she said, Lionel Ward. "He played piano in the common room after supper." Adrian's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in concentration. "He was old by then," Bertie went on. "Quiet most days, proud. He didn't like people feeling sorry for him. If the nurses fussed over him, he'd pretend he was asleep until they left." A small sound almost became a laugh in her throat, but it faded before it reached her mouth. "He used to play that song. Not the way I heard it on the radio. His version had that bridge in it. He said the middle was where the song told the truth." Adrian looked down at the sheet music. Bertie kept going because stopping now felt worse. "He told me once that the song had gone out into the world wearing another man's name. He didn't say it like he hated anybody. He said it like he had made peace with being buried while he was still breathing." The office grew still. Adrian tapped one finger against the edge of the folder. "People say a lot of things when they feel forgotten." Bertie looked at him then. Not sharply, not proudly, but directly. "Yes," she said. "They do." The answer landed harder than if she had argued. Adrian's face closed, but not before Bertie saw the wound beneath it. He did not want her to be right. That much was clear. Whatever this song meant to him, it stood too close to someone he loved, or owed, or had built himself around. The door opened before either of them spoke again. Celeste stepped in with her tablet against her chest. Her smile did not reach her eyes. I cleared the room for 15 minutes, she said, "but we need to decide how we're handling this." "This isn't a campaign issue," Adrian said. "Everything that happens in this building today is a campaign issue." Her gaze moved to Bertie with professional interest, not kindness. Bertie knew that look. It was the look people gave something they might use before deciding whether it was worth keeping. Celeste glanced at the folder. Is this about the song? Adrian did not answer. That was answer enough. For a moment, Bertie saw the calculation begin behind Celeste's face. Not panic. Not yet. Just the quick adjustment of a woman who understood that one unplanned voice at a catering counter could become a story people would talk about. I'm not trying to start anything, Bertie said. I only told you what he told me. Celeste's smile returned. Of course, and it's a touching memory. Truly, but memories are delicate things. They don't always belong in launch meetings. Bertie felt the old instinct rise in her. Apologize, step back, make herself small enough to be forgiven. She almost did. Then she looked again at the printed music on Adrian's desk, at the place where Lionel's bridge should have been. He played it the same way every time, she said. Not once. Not when he was confused. Every time Adrian closed the folder, no one spoke. That evening, long after the casting had been paused, and the catering crew had been sent down to pack what they could, Adrian brought Bertie to a smaller room deeper in the office suite. It was not glamorous like the boardroom. It was narrow, windowless, and lined with storage boxes. The air smelled faintly of paper and old sleeves. Celeste followed them in, saying nothing. Adrian removed box after box from the shelves. Bertie stood aside, careful not to touch anything. She had not agreed to become part of this, but the story had already taken hold of her sleeve. He found early arrangements, old rehearsal notes, copies of club programs, and handwritten scraps with names in the margins. Nothing proved what Lionel had told her. Not cleanly. Not enough to satisfy a lawyer, a boardroom, or a man determined to protect a ghost, but the gaps were there. A missing credit line on one draft. A program listing an unnamed pianist. A revision page where the middle section had been altered without explanation. Little absences, too small alone, too heavy together. Adrian stood over the table, with both hands braced on the edge. Celeste's voice came softly from behind him. Adrian, be careful. A loose story can damage a tribute before it even opens. He stared at the papers. Bertie expected him to dismiss her then, to thank her politely, send her away, and lock the room behind her. Instead, he picked up the earliest sheet and looked at the blank space where a name should have been. His face did not soften. It emptied. Bertie understood that he was no longer only questioning her memory. He was questioning the man he had built a shrine around. And the silence in that storage room made one thing painfully clear. If Adrian chose to believe her, he would have to betray the legend that had saved him. By the next afternoon, the missing space in the music had become the most dangerous thing in the building. The supper club was not open yet, but it already moved like a machine. Staff hurried through the narrow backstage corridors with garment bags, glassware, cables, and trays. A pianist tested chords from the stage, stopping and starting whenever someone from production waved a hand. The air smelled of fresh paint, coffee, and nerves. Bertie stood near a prep table, with her apron folded over one arm, watching people move around her as if she were both necessary and inconvenient. No one had told her to leave. No one had told her what she was supposed to do either. That was how power worked, she thought. It did not always push you out the door. Sometimes it left you standing in the room until you made yourself disappear. Cest found her beside the service entrance. There you are, she said, as if Bertie had been late to an appointment she had agreed to. We need 5 minutes. Bertie looked past her toward the kitchen crew unloading trays. I'm here for catering, and now you're also part of the story. The room Celeste led her into had a long mirror, soft bulbs, and a table covered with printed boards. On those boards were photographs of velvet booths, warm stage lights, smiling guests, and a mock-up of Bertie's own face pulled from a still image. Someone must have taken in the penthouse. Bertie stopped walking. The picture was not cruel. That made it worse. It had been softened, warmed, made touching. Under it, in elegant type, were words about a humble kitchen worker, a forgotten melody, and the emotional soul of the new supper club. Bertie felt something tighten behind her ribs. I didn't approve that, she said. Celeste gave a small, patient smile. It's not final. It's a direction. It makes it sound like Lionel was just a nice old man who taught me a tune. That is the part audiences can feel. That isn't the whole part. Celeste set her tablet down. The whole part is messy. The whole part could damage the opening, hurt investors, and turn a beautiful tribute into a fight. No one in that dining room came to hear. Bertie stared at the board with her softened face on it. She had scrubbed pots in nursing home kitchens. She had stretched paychecks until there was nothing left to stretch. She had buried her own singing voice under years of being practical. But she had never seen herself turned into packaging before. "You want me to smile," she said quietly, "and leave his name out of it. I want you to be careful," Celeste replied. "There's a difference." "No," Bertie said. "There isn't." Celeste's expression cooled. "Bertie, you seem like a decent woman. So let me say this plainly. You have no complete proof. You have a memory. A sweet one, maybe even an honest one. But memory is not enough to ask a room full of powerful people to rewrite a legacy." The words landed where Celeste meant them to land. Bertie thought of rent, of her mother's appointments, of Mara's tuition letters, hidden like contraband. She thought of how easily a woman in her position could be called difficult, confused, emotional. For a moment, she almost stepped back. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Mara lit the screen. "Don't let them make you small." Mom Birdie closed her hand around the phone and looked again at the PR board. Her face was there, but her truth was not. Lionel's pain had been trimmed out because it did not photograph well. When she left the room, Celeste did not follow at once. The stage rehearsal began before sunset. Rows of empty tables waited in the club like witnesses. The band gathered beneath the low gold light, older men with careful hands and guarded eyes. Men who had spent their lives playing behind singers, behind speeches, behind people whose names were printed larger than theirs. Reuben Clay sat near the edge of the stage with his horn case by his feet, his shoulders drawn tight. Adrian stood in the center aisle, arms folded. Celeste was beside him, speaking softly, still trying to steer the evening back into its planned shape. Bertie watched from the side of the stage. She had not sung in front of people in years. Not truly. A few lines in the kitchen did not count. Humming over dishwater did not count. Singing to Mara when she was little did not count. Not in the way this would. The microphone stood alone at center stage. It looked harmless. It was not. Adrian saw Bertie before Celeste did. Something passed across his face. Not permission, not refusal. He looked tired enough to be human. Celeste turned and stepped quickly toward her. "This is not the moment." Bertie's voice was low. "It's the only moment you haven't already edited." The band quieted. Bertie walked toward the microphone before her courage could drain out through her feet. Each step felt too loud. She did not look at the empty tables. She did not look at Celeste. She looked once at Mara, standing near the back wall with both hands clasped under her chin. Then Bertie faced the band. "I'm not here to perform," she said. Her voice shook, but it held. "I'm here because a man named Lionel Ward played something for me when everyone else had stopped listening to him." No one moved. She took a breath and sang the line Adrian had heard in the penthouse. This time she did not stop at the edge of it. She let the melody turn into the bridge Lionel had taught her, the part that bent low before it rose, the part that sounded too bruised to be decorative. Her voice was not young. It carried work, worry, and years of silence. But it was true. By the second phrase, Reuben had lifted his head. By the third, his hand was over his mouth. When Bertie finished, the last note did not vanish. It seemed to remain in the room, caught between the stage and the men who had spent their lives pretending they did not remember. Reuben stood slowly. "I heard him play it," he said. Celeste's face went still. Reuben looked at Adrian, not at Bertie. "Lionel played that bridge before the published version ever made the rounds. Some of us knew. We just didn't say it loud enough when it mattered." Another old musician lowered his eyes. Then another nodded. Bertie stepped back from the microphone, suddenly aware that her hands were trembling. Mara was crying quietly near the wall, but she was smiling too. Adrian did not speak. He looked at the stage, at Bertie, at Reuben, and finally at the polished room built to honor a legend that had just cracked in front of everyone. The bridge belonged to Lionel, And now Adrian had to decide whether the truth would stay on that stage, or whether he would carry it into the opening night and risk everything. By morning, Adrian had stopped trying to save the opening night as it had been planned. The office of the supper club was quiet, but not peaceful. On his desk lay the printed program Celeste's team had prepared, all clean lines and polished language, with the old song credited exactly as it always had been. Beside it was the revised sheet, still unapproved, with Lionel Ward's name placed where it should have been all along. Bertie stood near the window, with her hands folded in front of her. She had not slept much. The sound of the bridge had followed her home, through the train ride, through the small hours, through Mara sitting at the kitchen table and asking only once if she was all right. She was not sure she was. Singing had been hard. Waiting to see what powerful people did with the truth was harder. Adrian stood behind his desk, looking at the two programs as if one were a door and the other were a confession. His face showed none of the cold certainty that had filled the penthouse boardroom. He looked like a man who had reached the place where control could no longer protect him. Celeste was the only one in the room who still sounded certain. "We can acknowledge Lionel privately," she said. "A family settlement, a quiet revision later, something tasteful. Tonight cannot become an apology." Reuben sat stiffly in a chair by the wall, his hands resting on his knees. He had come in looking as if he expected to be punished for speaking. He did not interrupt. He only kept his eyes on the revised sheet. Bertie looked at Adrian. "Lionel was quiet his whole life," she said. "That didn't help him." Celeste turned toward her. "With respect, this is not that simple. It is to me." The words surprised even Bertie. They were not loud. They did not need to be. She had spent too much of her life making room for other people's comfort. This time, comfort had a cost, and it was not hers to pay. Adrian picked up the original program. For a moment, Bertie thought he would choose the safer page. She could see the pressure sitting on him. Investors, guests, headlines, reputation, the shining room downstairs that had been built around. A tribute now cracked at its center. He had wanted to honor the man who had once lifted him out of a hard life. To admit the truth meant admitting that love and gratitude had blinded him. Then Adrian tore the original program once down the middle. Celeste went still. "We correct it tonight," he said. "Adrian." "No." His voice was quiet, but the room obeyed it. "You knew there was a risk before I did. You chose to manage it instead of bring it to me. That is not strategy. That is concealment." Celeste's face changed, not into regret, but into the pale shock of someone who had never expected consequences to reach her. "You're removing me over this?" "I'm removing you because you treated a man's stolen name like a branding problem." No one spoke after that. Celeste gathered her tablet and left the office with her posture still perfect, but the power had gone out of her steps. Adrian turned to Bertie then. He did not apologize with grand language. He simply placed the revised program in front of her. "His family will be paid what should have been paid," he said. "Publicly. The opening will be changed, and if you are willing, I want you on that stage tonight." Bertie looked down at Lionel's name. For years, she had remembered him in small ways. A tune hummed over a stove. A phrase repeated to herself when life felt too heavy. The bend in a melody that seemed to carry more truth than any speech. She had thought memory was all she could give him. Now his name was printed cleanly on a program meant for a room full of people who could no longer pretend not to see it. "I won't be your story," she said. Adrian nodded. "No, you'll be his witness." That evening, the supper club opened without the campaign Celeste had built. There were still cameras, still well-dressed guests, still flowers at the entrance and low lights over the tables. But the room felt different. The posters had been changed. The printed programs carried Lionel's name. On the first page was a simple note saying the evening had been corrected to honor the true history of the music. Lionel's family sat near the front. They did not look triumphant. They looked careful, as if dignity returned late had to be held with both hands. Reuben played first. When the bridge came, he did not hide inside the band. He let the notes stand plainly in the room. Some of the older musicians lowered their heads. A few guests understood at once. Others simply felt the hush shift around them, the way people do when truth enters before explanation catches up. Then Adrian stepped onto the stage. He did not perform shame. He did not dress it up. He told the room the credit had been wrong, that the benefits would go to Lionel's family, and that the club would carry the corrected name forward. His voice tightened once, when he spoke of the man he had once believed without question. But he did not turn away from it. Bertie stood at the side of the stage with Mara beside her. Her daughter slipped a hand into hers. "You did it," Mara whispered. Bertie shook her head. "We remembered him. When Adrian called her forward, Bertie almost stepped back. The old fear rose out of habit. The fear of being seen too closely. The fear of singing and being measured. The fear of wanting anything that belonged only to her. Then she saw Mara's face, so she walked to the microphone. There was no need to explain everything. The room already knew enough. Bertie sang the bridge softly at first, then with more steadiness, letting the middle of the song open the way Lionel had taught her. Her voice was not polished into youth. It was warmer than that, marked by work and care, and all the years she had carried other people before carrying herself. When she finished, the applause did not come all at once. It rose slowly, like people standing up inside themselves. Reuben wiped his eyes. Lionel's family held one another. Adrian remained near the piano, watching Bertie not as a discovery, not as a campaign, but as a woman who had made him brave enough to stop protecting a beautiful lie. Some time later, the supper club became known for more than its velvet rooms and late-night music. On quiet afternoons, before the evening crowd arrived, its kitchen opened to older people who needed a meal, a song, or simply a chair where someone would listen. Bertie helped build the program herself. Mara came when she could. Reuben played when his hands allowed it. And on the first afternoon, the room filled with the sound of plates, soft laughter, and an old piano warming up. Bertie stood near the microphone without fear. She did not sing to prove anything. She sang because the bridge had finally found its way home.